pastors rarely feel like they can step away from their ministry responsibilities. They feel on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. One pastor explained, after being an active listener for a lot of other people, I really struggle being interested in my spouse and children and what's going on in their lives. How do pastors respond to this strain of ministry? Many of them continue to press on, ignoring the family consequences until a crisis occurs. Welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. Hi, I'm Byron Tyler. It's always a pleasure to get together with you, and I'm looking forward to introducing you to our guest today. I was just thinking about that song on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Who are the people in your neighborhood? You know, the people in your neighborhood you meet when you're walking down the street. Well, on occasion, I see my neighbors, Dee and Dan Henley, and they're with us today. Henley's, good to see you guys.
Well, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And we are starting to get closer in our friendship because Dan and I have been trying to get a routine of exercise, riding our bicycles on Saturday mornings. So we've had several excursions, right, Dan?
Oh, yeah, and I love it. Thank you so much for challenging me. This bike riding experience is new to me, and thank you for your patience.
Dee, I see that you've been on the bike recently.
Oh, yes. Yes. So it's contagious. So thank you.
Well, we're thankful so much for our friendship and and over the years, I've known you guys, but it's nice to get, a little more personal and, and fellowship. That's what the body of Christ is about, right?
We're excited about that. It's knowing your neighbors.
Yes.
We watched that movie, Mr. Rogers, and it was a special kind of movie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we all grew up with that.
Yeah, we grew up
yeah.
with it.
Oh, my goodness, learned so much.
Yes, we did.
Well, building healthy relationships, maintaining healthy relationships in marriage, especially in the home of a minister, that can't be ignored. And that's why we're here today. That's what we want to talk about. There's a marriage conference for pastors and ministers only. We've got details we want to share. It's sponsored by Agape. We appreciate all the great work Agape does in the city of Memphis. And so we definitely want to shout out to them, but we want to really, over the next couple of days, I've invited you guys to come here on Mid-South Viewpoint, and let's share your story and get into the nuts and bolts and really the nitty-gritty of pastors, their wives and families, and some of the struggles that they face. At the beginning of this pandemic, I had a pastor's wife call me and say, can you do something about pastors' wives and their families because, hey, sometimes we feel like we're sinking, you know? And I know you guys hear that. Sure. And you possibly have been there too, right, Dee?
Sure. Oh, yes. And it appears that you're all alone. You're all by yourself. So I can attest to what that lady was saying when she made that call. Yes. Yeah.
I read this where a pastor once made this statement. He says, I was at a board meeting where we were examining potential elders. One candidate was asked, are you willing to make the sacrifices with your family for the sake of the church? It was a weird comment because I asked myself, what's the right answer to that question? And I think sometimes pastors are put in those positions.
What we try to do is help pastors think through all of that.
Yes.
Putting God first, and then each other. God's called He's called me to serve my wife. I mean, it's God, then it's Dee, and even when I'm in conversations, and negotiations with my own salary or existence, I always say, I want Miss Dee to be happy. I want Miss Dee to be pleased. And I'm involved in a lot of different things, and at the end of the day, I get to come home to Miss Dee, and we're going to grow old together and love each other. And so we got to look at that. Now, having said that, there's some practical things that we can do and should do, and we'd love to share some of those.
And we want to talk about those. Let's kind of back up a little bit and talk about how you guys met. Where were you? What were the circumstances?
Well, I'll let Ms. Dee tell her story, and then I'll
tell the truth, and then we'll just put a little spice on it and allow the great apostle to come in and put his damper on it. So, no, but yes, we met on the campus of University of Southern University,
University of
Southern Mississippi. I'm sorry.
Golden Eagles down there in Hattiesburg,
University
Mississippi.
of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Yes, we met. In fact, I did not want to have anything to do with this fraternity guy. He was a part of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and they have a stigma put on them that they're rough and tough and bad boys. And here, this church girl coming from Mississippi who really, I'd never had a boyfriend, really. And I just didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he pursued me. And I really think it was the challenge of me just not being easy. Because he was well known on campus. I mean, just the guy that all the girls just wanted to hang out with, and here I am, this little country girl, and he kept pursuing me, and I finally gave in.
And Dee, let's back up just a little bit further into your growing up. Tell me about your family life. What was family life like for you?
Oh, yes. My mom and dad, who were very loving, and I grew up in church. I've been in church all my life. In fact, I played piano for two churches at age 12. So they kept me very, very busy. So I didn't really have time to do anything else but church and home. So when it was time for me to go to college, I was ready. So very strict upbringing.
That transition into college, did your faith, was it challenged? Did you maintain that through college?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
I did. And I really believe because the roots were so deep, because that's all I knew. In fact, I was the kid that was in the house watching Jim Baker on television while everybody else was outside playing baseball.
Yeah.
And then when I tried to mingle in there with the rest of the kids, I would always be the last one to get picked because they knew that my athletic abilities were horrible. But yeah, so I have an old soul. I really believe that.
I love that.
Yeah, so I'm just excited about how God allowed this gentleman to come into my life to put another feel on who God is.
Was he proper? Was he respectful?
You know, he really was. He really was, because he comes from good stock. And I know he'll talk about his mom and dad, and it was just incredible to meet them and to see why I was so attracted to him.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, Dan.
Good.
Yeah.
My side of the story, she did it pretty good. But the way I saw it was, I was a sophomore in college, or I was a junior in college. She was just coming in as a freshman.
Yeah.
And when I saw her, the first time I saw her, I looked at one of my fraternity brothers and said, that's going to be my wife. When you hear about this love at first sight, his name was Lewis Beverly. And I told Lou, I said, that's going to be my wife. And so I did pursue her. And I'm grateful that she said yes. But she was the kind that she was my my treasure.
It's okay, trophy.
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
And it's
There you go.
okay.
It's okay.
And but I still wanted to do everything I wanted to do. So our story hasn't been one that's just super clean, because I did everything I was big and bad enough to do. Even when we got married, I didn't treat the marriage correctly for the first, I say, 10 years.
At that time, too, you weren't in the ministry per se.
Oh, no.
I mean, you had a professional career.
Oh, yeah. I always like to say I was in the church, but the church wasn't in me.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't my Lord, and he was my Savior, but he wasn't my Lord. I didn't submit to the will of God, and it took a minute for me. And I'm grateful that Miss Dee didn't give up on me, and that's why we ask people not to give up on each other, because God's going to allow that change to happen, and when it does, wow.
I'm glad you said that, because so many couples, are so at odds with each other, and they're giving up. I mean, and if they could just hang on a little bit longer, maybe for a pastor to find a conference, a seminar like we're going to talk about here that Agape's putting on. We're afraid, I guess, as a pastor, to let people know we're having problems.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
And just so you know, it's not just pastors.
No.
But let me give you a quick example. We had there's a couple that volunteers at our marriage conferences. We've been doing these for 15 years. And he had a couple to call me that's out in Fraser. And that couple was basically, when you look at their assessment, it's just tore up. They don't know how to do conflict resolution, communications, just everything. But Ms. Dee and I look at that and we get excited about it. We get excited about it because we know that all they need is a little help.
Yes.
And some things that they've never learned, we'll teach them. And we're not trying to change their personalities. We're just giving them new skill sets. And this is what we always hear. If I'd have known that, I would have done. I didn't know any better. I didn't have a model.
Right. Yeah, because God has put us together to remove some things out of us that don't look like him. And sometimes that, that's painful, that pruning that we have to do in marriage. But if we could hang in there, I tell you, the aftermath is incredible. Because the first 12 years of our marriage, it was horrible, hard. But I thank God that he sustained both of us individually as well as collectively. And because of that, here we are now today helping others because of what we have gone through in our marriage.
Now, when I talk about a couple, that's why I started off with a couple, because it's easy for pastors to understand. Say, yeah, I've had couples like that before. But that's also true for pastors. See, Ms. Dee and I now, we minister to a lot of pastors. Remember, we got 1,300 pastors in our Church Developers Network, pastors and ministers, 1,300. And we minister to so many pastors in the same way that assessment was just terrible. Same with our pastors, because nobody ever stops to teach us how to communicate. They don't teach us how to deal with conflict resolution. They don't teach us how to not put the church first. Now, it's a priority, don't get me wrong, but it's God first, and then Ms. D, and then that church and the other matter. So we help them with that.
Do you find, Henleys, that the ministry is more than a job, but it's really a lifestyle?
Oh, sure.
Definitely. It's all the same. It just all ties in there together. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and that's hard for some folks to draw boundaries and the lines and all of that. But for us, it's all together. It's all the same.
Right. And I want to say too, coupled with God, the Holy Spirit, and prayer, and then the teachings, that's how you make this decision to be 100% responsible for your part in this relationship.
Yeah.
So to God be the glory. Yes.
It is work, Byron.
Yeah, it's hard work. Oh, yeah, it's work.
Do couples typically not realize that stress is putting on their marriage until they get to that breaking point? Yeah. You feel that's the case in many?
Sure. There's one guy who's really big in this industry. His name is Dr. David Olson. And he's over an organization that's called Prepare and Rich, and they minister to 6 million couples. But he says this, he's the founder of Prepare and Rich. And we use that to do our assessments. He said, stress either begins in a marriage or it will eventually end up in a marriage.
And see, even like a statement like that, just to hear that and to be aware of that makes it okay when it starts to happen, then you can address, because now it's been brought to your thought process.
Yeah, you kind of neutralize that, because I would assume, I'm not a pastor, but I would assume that it can be a lonely place in many cases. I mean, you need to have a group that you can bounce off of, relationships that maybe outside the home too.
Sure.
That you both can.
Oh yes, definitely.
Find that support.
One of the items that's surveyed, I guess, if you will, on the assessment is stress. It looks at the top 10 stressors in your life. And we have an opportunity as pastors to talk about those. So you're not talking about it with your congregation or somebody else. We're talking about it with people that experience the same thing that you're experiencing. And then you get those light bulb moments where you say, oh, wow, I didn't know it was, I thought it was just me, but it's really not. If it's feeling overweight or lack of exercise, lack of sleep, poor health, I'm reading off an actual assessment.
Yeah.
These are real issues that folks deal with. And your relationship with your relatives, or quite honestly, maybe your relationship with each other, your relationship with your children, that will stress you out. Growing into teenagers, and now you're growing into adults. And how do you, if you had another pastor who's dealt with a similar matter, that you can just bounce it around. Our 19-year-old son who just turned 20, we had a pastor that we could go to when he was dealing with some issues, and man, it blessed us tremendously. That's what we do.
Yes, and when you have the ability and the willingness to allow people to get into your space, and people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. So to have a listening ear for real, That's the very top on our list, to be able to listen. And then once we listen and they've invited us in, then that's when we can really share who we are and who Christ is and how to make this thing work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is so good. And listening is the number one thing that Ms. Dee and I teach. As a matter of fact, at the conference, that's going to be our session. It's called Listen to Love.
Yes.
And listening, Byron, again, if you think about it, so many times folks are just waiting to talk. They don't know how to just stop and listen to the experience of another to the point where that person knows that they've been heard. They know that they've been understood.
Yeah.
Man, that's intimacy at a whole nother level.
And these stresses that we're talking about that impact, and they impact every human that's listening to this program today. You know, they're not immune. We're not as humans.
Stress is
immune.
over money.
Exactly. Stress is over anything.
Anything.
But as you move into the ministry and you look at the responsibility that the pastor takes on as the shepherd of many people who are grieving, going through death, going through the excitement of the birth of a child. I mean, all of the things, it gets multiplied, in their life because of the people they're investing in. And then they deal with their own stresses in the family and trying to cope. Sadly, I understand that the suicide rate among pastors is very high.
Sure. And it's been said this way. Learn to take that plank out your own eye, and then you can see clearly to help others. Okay, I don't care what the issue is. Let's just use money because we all understand money. Man, we need to get our houses in order. Ms. Dee and I have an accountability partner. He's a minister. He's a pastor. Name is Travis Moody. I'll shout it out loud.
Amen.
Because
we
he's
love
an
Travis.
expert when it comes to finance, and he's a pastor.
Yes.
And we don't make a financial move without Travis. He's helped us to clean up our financial house. See, my take was if I needed more money, I'd just go out and make more. When I was in corporate America, I did that until God closed those doors.
Right.
Travis has taught us how to put a financial house in order where we can make so much less and do so much more.
That is another issue, Dee, that pastors and their families are, it's financial because oftentimes the churches are, there's a budget and X amount of dollars. Many of these pastors are working bivocationally. They're having a job outside their ministry to be able to provide for the family. And like in your case too, you're a nurse full time.
Oh yes. And for me, it's just all the same. I guess that's why for me now it's all the same. I know at one point my husband was home totally and just doing ministry, and I was the only one outside. And making the money, making money. And then also he was not even taking a salary from the church. And we've gone through a lot. I don't know if our story is so huge.
Oh, sure.
I mean, we've had 2 bankruptcies. And I know our second one, we were in the office and making jokes about it. But I believe we've got to stop being so serious about ourselves. God has it all under control, and he has a perfect path for us. No matter how it might look or how it might feel, it's always going to turn out for the best. We're going to win. I don't care if my husband is living under a bridge. I'm going to tell you, Martha Stewart is going to come see my bridge, and it is going to look awesome. But wherever he is, that's where my best self is. I'm always my best self with him, no matter where he is.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Dan, that is so valuable for a man to know that his wife feels that way about him.
Oh, sure.
In return for the wife to know that her husband feels the same way about her.
Well, there's love and respect. We'll talk about that. Let me circle back to the bankruptcy because I think it's important.
Yes.
Ms. Dee and I were in a season where she was not working and I was out in the workforce, and I literally made millions of dollars legally.
Yes.
Selling. FedEx at the time was my biggest customer and sold a whole bunch of stuff and got a little percentage of it. And I say that to say, as God started to close doors, literally we were still running off the runway, spending money we didn't have.
Yeah, like we were.
Right? And Travis, again, accountability partner, helped us through this whole bankruptcy thing.
Right. He said you can't keep living like that.
So the good news is for us, I've seen both. So now we minister to folks that are millionaires, and we minister to folks that can't rub 2 nickels together. Why is that so important? At this conference, you're going to see both. You're going to see pastors from the suburbs and wealthy, richer kind of congregations, and some that just quite honestly can't rub two nickels together, but we're going to all be together. You're going to see blacks and whites and Hispanics. You're going to have 60% black and 30% white and 10% Hispanic. You say, why is that important? Because that's how Memphis looks. This conference intentionally is going to look like Memphis because that's the answer to what we're up against, even with this racial thing God has shown us. We got to get together and we got to talk.
Yes.
Then those who feared the Lord, they talk with each other. The Lord listened and he heard. Then a book of remembrance was written in the presence of God concerning those who feared him and honored his name. And that's how we're going to rise above this thing. Same in a marriage. We got to learn to talk and listen to each other at a deeper level. And when we do, intimacy is increased. One philosopher said it like this, and I'll be quiet. He said, one of the deepest desires of the soul is to know that you've been heard.
Yes. And that is so true because I came into the relationship with very low self-esteem, very low.
Very domineering father with her mother.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes.
Very dominant.
Yes.
And I showed those same tendencies the first 10 years. I was very dominant.
That was something that was attractive to me because, this is my knight in shining armor. He's the yes man. And I love that about him. And he reminded me a lot of my dad.
A lot of times ladies will marry men like their dads, right?
Yeah, that's so. Yes,
and we didn't know any better.
We really didn't.
We just didn't. We didn't know that there could be equal kind of roles and equilibrium is what they call in a marriage. And we've had to learn that, and boy, have we learned. And so there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn.
The Agape Pastors Ministers Only. That is Pastors Ministers Only Marriage Conference, October 9th and 10th. This is a virtual conference via Zoom. Over 70 pastors, ministerial couples have already registered. Sure. There's still openings, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're going to leave it open until September the 9th. And our goal originally was 75 to 100 couples. We're going to stretch that to 120 because we've gotten some additional funding. And we're excited about that. We get to bless 120, but that's it because we want to still keep it intimate. So we're going to have 120 pastors and their spouses. And I know we say when he comes home, but sometimes it's she. We have some females and women that are senior pastors as well. Amen. They'll be a part of this. So.
Amen.
And so the way to register is how? Online?
You know what? I want to keep it intimate. I'd love it if folks would just send me an email.
Okay.
And it's Daniel.Henley at agapemeanslove.org. I know it's a long thing. It's Daniel, Daniel, .Henley, Henley, at agapemeanslove.org. Or let me give you an easy one. Pastor Dan, 33 at gmail.com.
Yes,
Pastor Dan, 33 at gmail.com.
Either way, right?
Either way.
But the time now is to go ahead and register. And register you and your spouse.
Yep.
Obviously, because we want your spouse involved.
Oh, definitely.
And the thing too is, if you're not able to attend this particular weekend, and you're dealing with some of the issues we talked about,
that's right.
Are you guys available?
Oh, absolutely. I wake up every day with pastors on my mind. How can we be a blessing to pastors and the folks that know anything about the Church Developers Network? They know that. But yes, Ms. D and I are available. We also have a marriage ministry leadership team.
Yes. Praise
when
God.
I say these are top of the line folks, there are 12 couples, black, white, and Hispanic. It looks like the makeup of the city. And we're all available to minister to pastors and also be mentors and that kind of thing. All of those will be teaching at this conference. And
Amen.
If someone sends me an email, we'll get them all that information. But here's the thing I want to make sure that we don't miss. Every pastor will have taken an assessment, a free assessment. So we will have an assessment on how your marriage is performing. Again, it's not a test. It's truly an assessment. Ms. D and I, we've taken this assessment 3 times. In December, we took it. And quite honestly, it showed that we had some issues.
Oh, yes.
So it helps you know where to do some tune-ups, right?
Some tune-ups. So now if you can imagine, we've got the assessment on 120 pastors. We've already done some early indications. We know the top 4 things that we need to minister to these pastors. Why? Because the assessments tell
I
us.
tell you what, I would like to pick up on our next program with those 4 things as we could.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
And kind of dive into that if that's okay.
That would be awesome.
Awesome.
Well, Henleys, God bless you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. And this conference again coming up, Agape Ministers and Pastors Conference only, October 8th and 9th. It's a virtual experience. Go to that email address and register if you have questions, or maybe you're having problems in your marriage, or you've got some issues you want to work out with your spouse and you want somebody to come alongside you. I encourage you to talk with Pastor Dan and Dee Henley. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.